This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the Forging Table. The mission of Undaunted.Life is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. At the Forging Table, you'll see a group of regular guys forging spiritual resilience by digging into God's Word, and we're welcoming all of you to come along on that journey with us. That's Howard, that's Donnie, that's Ryan. So, guys, here's the thing. We're going to get into Acts 27, but I think it would be remiss if we didn't take this opportunity specifically for Howard, Ryan, and myself, because we've got some cool things on this show. We've got Ask a Pastor with Joby Martin. That's one of our, most talked about and our favorite things that we have. And so once a month, Pastor Joby Martin from Church 1122 comes on here, and the donors get to ask questions of him that, maybe it's a question they would want to ask their pastor that haven't been able to ask. And so that's a fun one. And then we basically have Ask a U.S. Senator once a month, because Senator Mark Wayne Mullen comes on. We do a thing called From the Senate. So we get to talk about some politics, some things that are going on. But I think we should take advantage of this time, because right now we could do Ask a Licensed Marriage and Family Therapist, because that's what Donnie does for a living, okay? So I don't know if we've talked about that over the last couple of weeks.
Walked right into this one.
You did. And here's the best thing about it, Donnie, is you can't charge us for our time, for our questions. And so Ryan and Howard and I have had these burning questions, relationship questions. Some might or might not be about us, and they might or might not be about other people or things like that. But basically what we're going to do, if it's okay with you, okay, because you're not like trapped in the corner where Howard is, so you could technically run out of here. If it's okay with you, I think there are some questions that we have that the men in our audience would do well to hear, and for the lady listeners as well. So what do you say, Donnie?
I'd love to do it.
Okay. Let's start out with something really, really, really low-key as just kind of a nice introduction, a soft place to land. So let's talk about sexless marriages. Okay, so I know there are some guys that I've talked to, because, again, I get DMs and emails from guys from all over the place that have any number of things. Like, hey, I'm looking for a good devotional, all the way up through, hey, I've experienced this horrific level of abuse. What's your advice for me? But I do know that there are guys... A lot of guys are frustrated with their sexual relationship, whatever that means. But then there are guys that, in terms of their relationship, their wife will only allow sex to happen, and they can count on one hand the number of times a year that sex is allowed to happen, right? And there are men out there that are trying their best to honor their wives and to love them through it. And, I got a secondary question that I'll ask after they get a couple of questions in. But for a man that's wanting to abide by Ephesians 5 and to love their wife as Christ loved the church, and, I guess in what's that book? Love and Respect, right? And so they're not getting any respect as a man, but they're wanting to love because the level of respect they, get does not determine how much they're allowed to love. But knowing that there's obviously a myriad of issues there and backgrounds and things like that, just generically, what would the advice be?
I think the biggest thing that's missing, and, Kyle, there's a lot of conversations that happen in this whole subject matter in my office. And what I'm really finding is that the big O that we're trying to achieve is not orgasm, it's oneness. And I don't think most women that I talk to believe that they're part of the sexual part of their relationship. They feel like it's for the husband. They feel like they're giving something for the husband. And I don't think there's a lot of emphasis on the women understanding what that means to them, and that's work for them to do. But also men helping them figure out that part and letting the wife know that they want to find oneness, and it's not just about them getting what they need. And that's a heavy process. I mean, that's not an easy deal. I'd spent a lot of time in counseling working with people to help them find oneness in a relationship, and trying to figure out that intimacy is spiritual, emotional, physical intimacy. And most of us have only figured out the physical. We've only been trained growing up that physical is what it's all about. The church isn't talking about sex. We both know that. And at the same time, the world's talking about sex. So no one really focuses on oneness. So what I would say is, if a husband and wife or husband can help figure out what oneness looks like, can help figure out how to accomplish oneness to where the wife is getting something out of that. The wife is pursuing something. The wife is putting effort into it instead of just appeasing to what the husband needs or wants. I think they can really find what the Bible talks about is sex or intimacy.
Well, guys, there's your soft place to land. So we already ripped off the Band-Aid there. But yeah, guys, hit them up with questions that either you've been wondering or you think someone else would like to hear.
This is kind of a question I have for a friend. What do you say about men who are overly passionate about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, do you think that there's a repressed homoerotic feeling with that passion?
Yeah, do tell, Donnie. Perhaps the reason this question came up is because if you guys listened last week, Ryan shook on the fact that we were going to start training jiu-jitsu, but I just have to wear cologne. But I tricked him before the recording of this podcast into letting me triangle choke him, and then he pretended to be passed out or whatever. But yeah, that one doesn't even count because I wasn't wearing cologne.
Yeah.
It wasn't in a real jiu-jitsu
still have
gym.
the vision
So
of
now
you two.
I'm out of the deal because he was not wearing cologne.
That is not it.
I still
The
have
deal
the
still
vision
goes.
of you two wrestling here on the floor. So
It wasn't really wrestling. It was me just like getting a hairy leg wrapped around my neck.
It was you accepting
right, I think it's called
reality.
submission.
Submission. Hey, how should wives submit to their husbands?
Oh, that's that one word. You know, I think husbands first have to understand that submission is given, it's not taken. When a wife submits, it's because she wants to honor her commitment as a wife and to God to submit, and they give that. Submission isn't for us to ask for as husbands. And I think if husbands are submitting to God's authority and loving their wives as Christ loved the church sacrificially, that submission is easy for them to give because we're showing submission by how we're submitting to God's authority.
Does that kind of show how we proclaim the gospel and the fact that God doesn't ask us to submit to him? We lovingly submit to him once we believe.
That's right.
In Christ and who he is.
Yeah, it's a good parallel.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
So do you find a lot of married couples that come in, one is not willing to submit or they're not willing to submit long enough to see a change? Is that where you really see?
Yeah, we talked a little bit this morning about the crazy cycle. We didn't get much into it, but yeah, that's kind of what happens is one says, well, I'm not going to give unless you give, and I'm not going to give unless you give. And so it's a tug of war, and no one's willing to submit to what God's called them to do as a husband or wife. And so it's that power struggle of control. It's not submitting to the authority of God. I'm to love my wife regardless of how she's treating me or responding to me. And she's called to the same thing, but it's not my job. It's not for me to hold her accountable. Yeah. And so that's the problem is, Paul says when you marry, you'll face trouble. And so the challenge is, all marriages are struggling. If you're struggling, you're listening to this, it's because you're married. And so all marriage struggle. But there is hope if we can just follow what the gospel says about husbands and about wives and trusting him.
All right, I've got a question. So, and we're gonna keep this going for a little bit. I've heard of situations with couples where there is sometimes it's a man, sometimes it's a woman. One party desperately wants counseling, and the other side is completely unwilling, not disinterested. They're unwilling. So it's one thing to have a husband and a wife in your office, and one of them is clearly not interested in the process, but they're there. But then there are other people that are some form of, no, nothing's wrong. Why would we go to counseling? Why would we spend that money? To people just being like, this is stupid. This isn't going to work. Like my parents did counseling and it didn't work, that kind of thing. So if you're the person that wants it and your spouse just is not listening to you, not listening to advice of their friends, not listening to the pastor or whoever, like what is a person to do there?
That's very common, Kyle, and that's a good call. Is the first thing I'm doing if my spouse doesn't want it is I'm continuing to work on me being the best version of me, humbly serving God, doing the heavy lifting that I need to do. I'm holding myself accountable to being that person. So number one, I'm modeling that. Number two, I'm probably finding ways to introduce, whether those are church conferences, okay, or something that would introduce concepts that would allow my spouse to listen and hear something that would enable truth. I might even be going to counseling by myself to help me become better. But you can't force that. I think you got to pray for them, and if you're not praying for them, you're losing that opportunity. But secondly, I think you have to model it and just hope that God opens up some softer hearts. And, part of my job, a lot of times people walk in my office, Kyle, and one wants to be there and one doesn't. And a good therapist will be really good at getting the other person to realize, hey, this isn't what we thought. I also want to mention that there's a geography to that, Kyle. A lot of therapists on the East Coast and the West Coast, it's very welcomed. It's very recognized. Matter of fact, people feel it's almost a hierarchy of your status in the society because you have a better therapist than the other guy. But in the Bible Belt, in the middle, it's seen as something's wrong with me if I go to a therapist. And so there is a little bit of geography that's affected by that.
Can you take your therapist hat off real quick?
You got it.
All right. How often should couples have sexual relations?
There was a study done that I have the book, and it's interesting because I think that There is no correlation. This is what's cool. I can't take therapists off hat.
I know. I was just messing with you.
There's no correlation between the number of times people have sex and the quality that they decide not quality, but the marriage being something that they both enjoy. Okay, so the quality of the marriage and the number of sex there's no correlation. Now, the agreed upon number of sex and the quality of marriage is a correlation.
Okay.
So when the husband and wife agree on how often to have sex and they're both on the same page, their marriage is better, according to all the surveys. When they don't agree, their marriage is bad, no matter how often they have sex.
So one thing that I look at in regards to sex is that within the confines of marriage is that sometimes quality is better than quantity. And so that's like, I've had the discussion. My wife and I have had the discussion, not to get too in depth, but that sometimes, quantity sounds great, but what if the quality is like the other person's not into it, or the other, either person's not into it? Like, is it really worth that connection and that intimacy if you both aren't connected?
And go back to my earlier thing. It's not about orgasm, about oneness.
Yeah.
And if you can achieve oneness once a week, as opposed to just orgasm twice, 3 times a week, oneness is better. Oneness is defined by Scripture. Oneness is what God intended it to be. And yes, that's better than several times where it's one-dimensional. And that's the problem with a lot of marriages.
I think like that's a question. I think that's a conversation that most marriages don't have.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And it was eye-opening when we went through, that conversation and everything. It's like, man, I never thought of it that way, but I never thought about the oneness, and like the intimacy is the bigger aspect than just the orgasm.
And I'll tell you, Kyle, and probably we can do this at another time, but the Bible says sex is 4 things. Intimacy is 4 things. 1, it's good. The Bible says intimacy, sex is good, and we don't teach that. Okay, our young people don't understand that. Second, it says it's holy, and we don't teach that either. I mean, we don't touch it. Third, it's owed, and that's in the Scripture, and that's something we have a hard time. We dance around that because we've misused it. And fourth, it's fun. It's meant to be enjoyable, Song of Solomon. And I wish more churches would teach those 4 things when we're at intimacy, because if we taught that, I think we'd have less issues.
Well, so that was going to be my question. Like, most men that you see come in, or women, what's the model they see?
Yeah, the model they see is what they grew up with. Some guys grew up with porn, and that's the model. Some women grew up saying it's bad until I get married, and then I'm supposed to make it good, that it's dirty. The models are what the world gives us. You just look on social media, or watch a couple movies or TV shows or whatever. That's the model.
So they haven't disconnected it. It's still...
And most of the people I'm talking to are Christian couples.
And it takes time to disconnect from that. Somebody who's grew up in like Christianese and as a Christ, not really a Christ follower, just knew about Christ. Like, porn has an effect on how you interact in your marriage and from beginning to end. And I feel like, we read a book, not a while back ago, but I feel like we've grown up to objectify women, not subjectify, objectify women, and that they're a means to an end. And like, I remember saying like the stupidest things as like a high schooler. Like, I was like, oh yeah, I'll get married. And then when I'm 40, I'll divorce her and I'll go get a hotter, younger one. And this is like you have no idea what marriage is and what God has intended and what love actually is until you're married, until you're in the thick of it with that person. So this year I've gone through about 70 hours of training to be a sex therapist. I don't know how much me and you've talked about this. And I've been amazed how much it's automatically applied to my sessions. And so if couples walk in my office and I say, hey, how's your sex life? If they see that I really want to dive into it, 75% of them want to dive into it now, quickly, let's get to it. And it's just, they're hungry, but no one's confident enough to talk about it. No one will sit down and break away the pieces and say, hey, let's deal with this. Everybody's uncomfortable with it. Even some therapists, church is uncomfortable with it. And when you're comfortable with it and you can do a deep dive into it and both are willing to do it, and that's sometimes a different deal, it's so effective and necessary.
So unpack that a little bit, because you say sex therapist, and then I'm sure we got a bunch of different people thinking a bunch of different things. So please, specify exactly what that means and how is it applicable in a counseling setting?
Yeah. So there's a lot of counselors that'll talk about sex, but I'm going through probably a 2-year process to really get into dysfunction in sexuality, improving sexual wholeness, because this is through a group that does it from a biblical point of view, but everything from disorders to enhancing sexual intimacy in marriage. And so that's kind of what I'm going to be licensed through this group. And so it's been just amazing. Just some of the people that are leading me and teaching me have written a ton of books and have done this for 30 years from a biblical side. And it's been amazing just to sit next to them and listen to them and have them on my phone where I can just text them and say, hey, I got a question about it. And we're talking about pain with intercourse. We're talking about female problems, male problems. We're talking about ages 60 to pornography and everything that's done to young people. Every gamut of what gets in the way of healthy sexuality. This is kind of where therapists can talk about it, but I don't know that they've been trained in it. And so that's the journey I'm on right now.
So when you say healthy sexuality, like I've read some things this year from people that have a little bit maybe more of a romanticist or charismatic kind of point of view as to what sex is. It's kind of borders on a little bit of creating an icon, or not icon, but a idol out of sex and the sex act and what it's supposed to mean for us holistically, outside of the physical. And so when you talk about a healthy sexuality, what is that?
I stay with you. It's spiritually, emotionally, physically connected. I'll give you just a quick example. I had a couple come in my office, and he's having erectile dysfunction issues, older. They haven't really had intercourse in a while. And I asked her, I said, do you like to be close to your husband? Do you like to connect with him? Do you like to touch him? Do you like to be close to him? Do you like to be naked connecting? She goes, absolutely. And I go, well, do you like to be close to her? Do you like to be physically close? Do you like to be emotionally close? Do you like to hold her and touch her? Yeah. I said, then what's the problem? Well, I can't have erection and we can't, have intercourse. I said, so what's the problem? See, we're too caught up on one thing. We're not caught up in just being together. And a lot of the problems here for a lot of men, if I'll just be with her, that changes the whole dynamic. I've been amazed at how it changes the dynamic. If I can get someone for 15 minutes to just be focused on each other, and there's some techniques to that, but the reality is intimacy is that emotional, spiritual, physical connection, and that's how God made our bodies. But we're so one-dimensional, looking for one thing. Let's get to the finish line, let's score, and we're losing the whole sight of how God made our bodies.
So when we talk about healthy sexuality, even in line of that, because I think you and I were talking about a Gary Thomas book where in the same book there was a man that was very voracious in his sexual appetite and his wife had none. That's the story that everybody's familiar with or at least heard of from a colloquial standpoint. We kind of understand that meme. But then there was also the man that was disinterested in sex and the woman who wanted it all the time, right? And so when there's an inequity, which by the way, I feel like men don't do a really good job of talking about this.
Right.
Because I've talked to my wife before and she's like, yeah, me and my girlfriends, we talk about sex and different things like that. But I just look around and I'm like, me and my guy friends, like we have deep conversations, but none of us are like, well, this is how many times a week I do it. And this is how many times a week I do it. And this is what it looks like. And this is what it, we don't really get into those discussions. And so when a guy's on the side of the ledger of being unhappy with the frequency or the quality or the woman, there seems to be an inequity there, how to deal with that, like how to approach a situation like that. Because I can't think of a couple that I've talked to where the man is like, yeah, every time I want it, my wife wants it too, like, or vice versa. You know what I mean?
No, I had a couple like that in my office, and ever since I've been kind of going down this path, Kyle. And I asked them to do something for me, and I said, listen, for the next couple of weeks, sex off the table. And I said, what I want you to do is twice this week, I want you to be basically naked in bed, and I want you to massage her. There's no genitalia touch. There's no tits touch. All you're doing is massaging her body, but there's off-limit stuff. And you're going to do that for 15 minutes, and I want to find out what you're thinking. I want you both to come back and tell me what was going on here. And then I actually, 2 days later, it was going to be reversed. And we did that a couple of weeks because I said, I want to make sure you're into each other without focusing on what's next. Can you be all in on touching your wife and your wife being touched and her feeling good and you feeling good about that process and vice versa without it being the next step? By the second week, the guy texted me and he said, Donnie, first of all, we've never been this close. Secondly, we broke the rules. But they both broke the rules. They both talked about breaking the rules, and they both wanted to break the rules. Notice that's different. She was so excited to have a moment of connection without that being the concept. And it varied, because when I first said this to him, I'll be honest, guys, when I said this to him, he looked at me like, okay, Donnie, what's the point? What are we doing here? We're paying you
That's
for
torture,
this.
bro.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But see, sometimes we got to go backwards to go forwards. Sometimes we got to break it up and just focus on simply just the building blocks. Because great intimacy, you got to start here and it builds to here. There's no buildup if we're just trying to get here. And so that was some of the things that I would try to get when they're so polar opposite, is how do we bring them together and then move them together up?
Okay, good. Other questions? Let's go. We got him here. He's not going to invoice us.
Wow.
And I had one.
Oh,
I didn't have this on
Because
my
I got more, but hey, y'all go.
Mine are much less detailed, but so we've got 4 kids. How do you model a good physical relationship for your young kids?
Yeah. With you and your wife, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I love that question, because I think when they see intimacy, when they see you still kiss each other, when they see you hold hands, when they see that you go on date nights and you leave them and you're still enjoying each other, when they see there's a time for family and a time for them, but a time where get out of the way, she's more important to me, he's more important to me, that helps build the foundation. They got to know that it didn't stop with just them, and then there's still intimacy and there's still desire. I mean, I loved to tell my wife she looked gorgeous and man, you look good, and my kids get embarrassed. I love that because it is affecting my adult kids now. It's affecting the marriage and their relationship. And so that's what I would say.
Okay.
That was, he totally asked a question I was going to ask.
Okay, well, while you think of your next one, I got one. So this is serious. So all kidding aside, talking about abuse in relationships, and that can take many forms. Obviously, there's physical, psychological, emotional abuse. Some of it is done unintentionally. Some of it's perhaps not done intentionally, but abuse happens nonetheless. A lot has been made of a marriage ending because of infidelity or death, but not necessarily abandonment. And so there are certain parts in Scripture, like I actually want to read this here. So this is 1 Corinthians 7, 12 through 16. To the rest I say, I, not the Lord, that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. If any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. But if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved. God has called you to peace. For how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband, or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? And so I guess the line there is, what does abandonment mean? Right. Because, a lot has been made. There have been churches where, here's an easy, example that people probably heard of. Man is physically abusive to the woman, beats her up, right? Woman can't leave because he's not dead and he hasn't performed infidelity. Right. And so a lot of churches have been like, sorry, you can't leave. And then they basically send this woman back into the man's home to be beaten more. Yeah. And then we see other examples of churches saying, hey, look, y'all have such a bad marriage and such a bad relationship. You just got to get out. And they will violate the biblical dictates for what a marriage can be. So I guess that abandonment line, when there is abuse, I know physical is the one we most think of, but when there's abuse of any kind, serious abuse, like when does it become like abandonment? Like this marriage has to end for the safety of the parties involved.
It's not a black and white. It's not a line that I can define. The first thing I'd say, Kyle, is divorce is not the unpardonable sin. My dad has been married 5 times. I grew up in divorce. You guys are well aware of my testimony. I'm a 31-year marriage and focus and a marriage therapist because my parents got divorced. So let's not forget who we serve. The God we serve can make something bad into something good. I think it's a personal thing. I'm never asking a wife or husband to stay in something abusive. Now, you can get out of something abusive and work on it without getting a divorce. You can still hang on to that. And for the people that do, man, more power to them. I'm amazed by people that will stay so long. I don't know that I would. I'd be honest with them. And they stay and they really fight, and I appreciate that. But there are some that I know that have said, well, their husband's an alcoholic. I have a client that I know of that, where the wife is abusive, and they've decided to leave, and they hung on for years. I mean, these aren't quick decisions, and they left. And there were many people that said, hey, we love you, and they went on, and you could probably throw a couple verses at them But they went on feeling that was the best thing for them and their family, and they went on to move on. And I don't believe God holds them any more accountable to sin than he does me and you. And so it's a personal decision, but man, that abuse and that trauma has got to be dealt with. You can't just check that box. It hangs on, and you've got to deal with that so that you can have a successful marriage. Some people that stay in and haven't dealt with the trauma, it damages the future. And so you got to deal with it. But I wish there was a line there. There's not. I'm very appreciative of the people that stay in for that. And the ones that leave, I totally get it. I understand it. And I don't believe God turns his back on them.
Okay. Howard, Ryan?
All right. Let's go. So you're a marriage and family counselor.
Why are we already laughing? Because the look on your face.
Right, I think we've established that one, yes.
Yeah. I'm just saying, but like you base a lot of your practice on biblical practices, theology, and stuff like that. How do you deal with like a counterculture world?
Yeah.
Like right now, like you're going to deal with families that have kids who are in different lifestyles, maybe even couples who are in different lifestyles. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, that's a good question for my practice. And I have a practice you guys are aware of. We're 8 therapists. That's a Christian practice. And I have Muslims that see me. I have homosexuals that have come in my office for anxiety for some things other than marriage. I have a lot of that happens. And what they know is I'm going to love them with the love of Christ. A lot of people think if you come into a Christian practice, they're going to throw the Bible at you. And that's not true, because I was on Channel 9 a while back, and I told them, listen, a Christian practice should, first of all, to the Christian be such an awesome place, because you're going to speak the word, you're going to teach them, you're going to pray for them, you're going to use the Bible. But it should be the most awesome place for non-Christians, because you'll have the love of Christ, and someone's going to be safe and consider what you're dealing with and not judge you. And so that's kind of how I look at it. The people that come and see me that aren't Christians, I don't believe. Matter of fact, I just had a lady in that I've seen 8-9 years. I've seen both her daughters. I've seen her sister. I've seen her sister's kids. I've seen her husband, and she's a strong Muslim woman. And she loves coming to my practice. She knows she's accepted. So I think we show the love of Christ. They know I pray for them. They know what I believe. I don't hide that. But they also feel very accepted and taken care of, and I'm very careful in making sure that they're the number one priority.
Awesome.
All right. This will be the last question before we get into the Master and Commander chapter of Acts. And, we'll start, or we'll end as low-key as we started. So let's talk about swinging. So we live in a town, so I don't know what it is in the water in Edmond, Oklahoma.
You're right.
So let's just describe Edmond real quick. Edmond, Oklahoma, if there is a family magazine or periodical or publication out there, at some point, Edmond, Oklahoma has been named the best place in America to raise a family. It's because of the high cost of living, the high per capita income, low crime rates, highest percentage of people with college degrees, because of the property taxes and the way that it's distributed, because of the school system, because of all these different things. Edmond really is kind of an incredible place to live. Like, I feel very, very lucky that I got a scholarship, and my wife got a scholarship to the University of Central Oklahoma, which is located right here in the center of Edmond. All that's great. It's very pristine, which means there's a lot of high income people that they look great. Like, my God, they look incredible. Their clothes look awesome. They're always tan somehow, even in the winter. Like, beautiful cars that are always detailed, perfectly manicured lawns, these gorgeous, palatial homes and all these different things. And their kids they've got private coaching at the earliest ages. And, oh gosh, they're all going to be national merit, and they're going to get 34s on their ACT and all the different things. But the level of depravity that we see here in this city, especially when you talk to pastors or counselors that know a thing or two, is significant. And it's in 2 really nefarious areas. One is abortion, because the 15-year-old daughter gets pregnant. Dad makes a lot of money, but also has a good reputation. He needs to keep that reputation. He's going to pay $500 for that problem to go away, so he doesn't have to have awkward conversations down at the golf club. But then also, there is a wild swinging culture here in this town, which is just astonishing. But on the swinging thing, it doesn't even make sense to me. Of course, it makes sense to me that people want to have sex with as many different partners, that they want to slake that lust, as it were. But like, when you have someone that comes into your office, whether they're admitting that, or you have 2 couples that maybe don't see the problem with it, like, I know you've dealt with it. How in the world do you even address something like that?
It's tough, because people aren't there to get answers.
Yeah.
They're there for someone to tell them it's okay. they're there to show them acceptance. They're there to make it about that person. We don't want to scratch the surface under there. And what I just try to do, and I see it a lot of adolescents, and a lot of adolescents are doing stupid things. And I like, guys, listen, where do you want to be in 5-10 years? I said, because what you're building is not going to make you happy. I forget who it was that basically said, you climb the ladder of life and you get to the top and it's against the wrong wall. The people that are playing in that world are going to be the loneliest 67-year-old you've ever met in your life. And it's not going to yield peace. It's not going to yield, the people getting all the plastic surgery, got to look good. Guess what? At some point, that's going to come due, and the swinging's going to come due, and the abortion and the living that life's going to come due, this side of heaven or the other side of heaven. So I just help them understand, listen, I'm not going to judge where you're at. That's not my job. But are you going to be happy down the road? And would you like me to explain where I've seen others go that are living your life? And I'll just give you a couple of scenarios and you can decide if that's the route you want to take, because you get to decide. And so that's kind of the approach I take is, listen, I can tell you some things I've seen. That's probably the biggest benefit I have is I've seen a lot. And I said, hey, this is the route you're going from what I'm seeing. Is this where you want to go?
That explains all the upside down pineapples in Edmond.
Yeah, why is that a thing? Why the funniest thing about
flamingos
that
too.
is
Flamingos.
Wait, flamingos too?
Yeah, there's some about flamingos and upside down pineapples.
Well, that's really
I didn't
funny.
even know Edmond was like all about swinging, man.
Yeah, it's not like it's all about swinging, but there is a healthy swinging population as far as I understand it. But the funny thing about that is Russ, who we talked about a lot, he came into Sunday school one day with a pineapple shirt on, and pineapples were all different directions, but a lot of them were upside down.
So
People
he
were
had no clue.
no
Before
idea.
we end off, if any of your any people reach out to you on books for healthy sexuality, marriage stuff, I'll get you whatever you need to make sure you've got it on a list of ones to direct.
Well, to even mention some here that you just go ahead and give some shout outs to the ones here, because a lot of guys will just pause this and go right to Amazon. So any off the top of your head, go for it.
Yeah, off the top of my head, there's just a few. There's a sheet music's probably pretty popular, and some of the nuances of people that are doing it. The ones that I've started sending that way are designed more by. I'll have to get it to you, to be honest with you. I've got 3 or 4 in my office, but I don't want to butcher the names of the authors. But I'll get you a few, and that'll probably be the best way to get it over there.
We can put them in the show notes.
Oh, yeah, because here's the
Put 'em
thing,
in the
guys.
show notes.
Everyone keeps asking me, where do I find the things that you said are in the show notes? They're in the show notes, guys. So just wherever you're listening to this, just go into the show notes. And I'll probably, whenever this episode comes out, I'll get the books and then I'll maybe post the screenshots or all that and say, hey, in reference to what we were talking about there. But we do need to go ahead and get into Acts 27. I did want to just take a little bit of time with that because I thought that would be an interesting thing for our audience, because a lot of people just kind of look at Acts 27 like it's kind of a pass through. It's a very interesting account of something that's incredibly detailed that maybe seems like it sticks out in the narrative. And perhaps after we're done going through it, you will come to the same conclusion. But we're going to go over it nonetheless because this is part of God's inspired word. And somehow this points to the truth of the gospel. So we're going to start in verses 1 through 12. So Ryan, if you will hit verses 1 through 12, please.
And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some of the prisoners to the centurion of Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking on the ship of, Adramanthium.
Let's go with it.
Yeah. That's rough.
That's a rough one.
Which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia. We put to sea accompanied, you had to give me this.
Aristarchus,
a Macedonian from Thessalonica.
Thessalonica.
Man, you know what? I actually listened to this.
I didn't even give you this on purpose. This is a rough one. This is a rough one.
I actually listened to this so I could get the names right, and I totally forgot them.
I mean, how would everyone say, what was that? Adramanthium?
Adramanthium.
Golly.
Hey, I did the same thing.
You know what? Actually, Ryan, you're fired. Howard, you're going to read this section.
Read it.
No,
Thank
because
you.
it would have screwed us both up. So guess what? Let's just start back over from verse 1. Read it, smart guy.
Oh, from verse 1.
Yeah, verse 1, 1 through 12.
Okay. When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. We boarded a ship for Adramanthium, about to sail for the port along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. Archimaeus and Macedonia from Thessalonica was with us. The next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so that they might provide for his needs. From From there, we put out to sea again and passed to the land of Cyprus, because the winds were against us. When he had sailed across the open sea off the coast of Sicilia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myria and Lycia. There, the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy, and we put us on board. We made slow headway for many days and had difficulty arriving off Cnidus. When the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed for the lee of Crete, opposite Salamon. We moved along the coast with difficulty and came to a place called Fair Havens, near the sea of Lycia. Much time had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous because it was now after the Day of Atonement. So Paul warned them, "Men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to the ship and cargo and our lives also." But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and the owner of the ship. Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that they should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was the harbor in Crete, facing both southwest and northwest.
And so you go this entire narrative. You're 26 chapters in. You go into chapter 27, and it is a historical documentary. Right, that's good. This feels like some of the, because I've seen some great World War II documentaries, and I've seen some horrible ones that were incredibly boring. These would have been the ones they likely showed in high school. But like, this is such a detailed thing. And so I don't know what it was like for you guys, because I was reading through commentaries. I feel like most of the commentaries just kind of wave their hand over this entire chapter, and we're just kind of like, yes, they're showing you a lot of detail. The detail is important. We don't know exactly why the detail is important, but the detail is there because this is a historical record. And so this may not be interesting. This may not be inspirational. It may not end up on a coffee mug, any of these scriptures, but it's still very important.
I think what I read in the commentaries is that at this time, it's almost wintertime. And during that time, they did, like, all the ships really didn't sail because the waters were treacherous and everything. And so Paul's basically saying, hey guys, let's not sail. The waters are going to be bad. Like, let's dock here. And the merchant ship captain was like, no, I've got all this merchandise. I want to get it back up to Italy because he wants to make money.
Exactly.
But he doesn't want to sit and wait 3 months and winter out. And so Paul basically had a prophetic, thought in that fact that he's like, we're not going to make it. And like, as we see, as we go along in this chapter, they go through a lot of turmoil.
Yeah.
Two things jumped out. First of all, you notice he starts with we. I think Luke joined him here. And Luke hadn't been part since about Acts 21. So Luke is joining him and his party. And then look at how much freedom and respect he gets. Here he is, a prisoner. There's 270 on the boat, and they're listening to him. They're giving him a voice. He's bringing people on the ship with him, like Luke. And so there says a lot about his demeanor, his leadership capabilities, his personality, just by kind of reading between the lines is at least what I was getting out of it.
Well, you see in 2 Timothy where he had wrote about, where is it at?
So bring me my cloak.
Bringing his cloak.
Yeah.
So we see that historical context of it coming back into play here.
Another thing is that merchant ship had over 100 people on board. It wasn't like, like the boat that you see like with Jesus and the fishermen. Like, this was a huge ship with like a bunch of people on board along with
276.
Oh, it's 276? Okay.
On board.
So over 200.
That's we see that at the end of 27 on how many came off, I believe.
Okay,
So,
is that what it was?
yeah, I think it was over 200. 276 is what I wrote over there.
So there is
276.
Yep, 276.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot of people on
Yeah,
board.
exactly.
Like, you're playing with lives now too.
Yep, and it's about to get bumpy. So Ryan, if you will read verses 13 through 20.
Now when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed the anchor and sailed along Crete, close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind, called the northeaster, struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Running under the lee of a smallest island of Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on this Syrtis, they lowered the gear and thus were driven. along. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither the sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned.
So at this point, I mean, this is bad. Anytime you listen to any historical record of ships in turmoil, obviously there has to be a survivor for us to kind of get an idea of what was being done. I mean, they are doing absolute last ditch, type of things. And we see here that it didn't look good. All hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. And so there's not like a sunny disposition here as to kind of where they're going to end up. Donnie, keep this going with 21 through 38, and then we'll talk about that whole section.
38, okay. When they had gone a long time without food, then Paul stood up in the midst and said, Men, you ought to have followed my advice and not to have set sail from Crete and incurred the damage and loss. Yet now I urge you to keep up your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I've served, stood before me, saying, Do not be afraid, Paul, you must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who are sailing with you. Therefore keep up your courage, men, for I believe God that it will turn out exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on a certain island. But when the 14th night came, as we were being driven about in the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailor began to surmise that they were approaching some land. They took soundings and found it to be 20 fathoms, and a little farther on they took another sounding and found it to be 15 fathoms. Fearing that they might run aground somewhere on rock, they cast 4 anchors from the stern and wished for daybreak. But as the sailors were trying so to escape from the ship and had let down ship's boats into the sea on the pretense of intending to lay out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, Unless these men remain on the ship, you yourself cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it fall away. Until the day was about to dawn, Paul was encouraging them all to take some food, saying, Today is the 14th day that you have been constantly watching and going without eating, having taken nothing. Therefore I encourage you to take some food, for this is for the preservation, for not a hair from your head of any of you will perish. Having said this, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of all, and he broke it and began to eat. All of them were encouraged, and they themselves also took food. 37?
Yeah, through 38.
38. All of us in the ship were 276 persons. When they had eaten enough, they began to lighten the ship by throwing out the wheat into the sea.
So amidst all this turmoil, we go from verse 20, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. And then verse 36, then they all were encouraged and ate some food for themselves. This is a very important story because we see, yes, this was a large ship. It was a merchant ship. They shouldn't have been out there. Paul didn't ignore the part. It's, back in verse 21, he's like, yeah, you should have listened to me. You shouldn't have set sail from Crete and incurred this inquiry and loss. And yet here you still did it. But then we all kind of end with him breaking bread and giving thanks to God. And so this is kind of, they were not comparing it to the Lord's Supper or anything like that. But this is still important that in the midst of all of this, it's like, no, we are going to eat and we're going to give thanks. And it changed their circumstances.
I think they gave thanks. Nobody perished. I mean,
right.
The merchant captain wanted to save his cargo. That got tossed overboard, but nobody lost their life.
Right.
Which was awesome. I mean,
so
it's more precious than the merchandise on board.
Mm-hmm. So Paul had been in 3 shipwrecks, and here he is just trusting God. Here he is, the cool, calm leader here, telling them none will perish, and then taking the time. I don't know about you guys. We want to get in a hurry. I grab some food and move on. I don't know that I break bread and, we're about to, everybody thinks we're going to sink and it's 14 days. Hey, let's thank God for this food. And so the wherewithal of his mindset and his trust in God said, hey, in the midst of the storm, think of the storms you guys have been in the last year or several years. The storms, do we sit there and have that faith and trust? Hey, God's going to see us through. No, we're wondering how far down that we're going to sink when this ship hits the rocks. And so that's such a testament.
One of the things I read that I thought was very interesting in verse 23, where he says, for this very night, an angel of God to whom I belong, whom I serve, stood before me. And he points out that piece of to whom I belong. And I just thought that was very interesting, when you look at, he belongs to God, right? And that encouragement and that hope. And I wrote down here, this was out of, I think, MacArthur's. He said that the church comes from the Greek word kiriki, which means those who are possession of, or kurios, or those who belong to the Lord. This is what the true church is. It's the possessions of God and the possessions of the Lord Jesus Christ. So he's telling them, this is who I belong to, and that unity of that, and that's where he gets that hope and that faith and encouragement in that piece.
And we see the message from the angel, like, hey, Paul, you have to stand before Caesar, right? Yeah. I mean, you're not going to do that out here, like in the middle of the ship. So you're good, bro. And but even if you get that message, at some point you got to be like, are you sure? This has been a pretty crappy last several days. Like, how exactly are you going to get us out of this?
It's been a pretty crappy couple of years for Paul.
Yeah.
So, but I think another thing that you take heart in is that, like, man, think of how stressful the situation was.
Right.
Nobody was eating. They didn't eat, 15 days? 14, 15 days. They didn't eat anything. So they have no nourishment. They have no strength or anything. Paul has to encourage them. Not only does he encourage them with the prophetic thing from God, telling them, "Hey, we're all going to make it, but you guys need to eat something. You need to get some strength. You need to be strengthened."
I was thinking,
oh, go ahead.
You ever been out and sea where you can't see land, you can't see light?
I've been out in the middle of the sea.
Well, I mean, when you look and see how black it is, and when you can't see stars, and when you're this thing and you're going, I mean, it's an ominous feeling of just there's nothing there. There's that hopelessness. It just makes a lot of sense, and I think all of us probably gone through our lives where we felt that way, even not on a boat.
Oh yeah.
Oh, and then you also get a little bit of perspective because, like, if you've ever been on a cruise ship or something like that, and it's your cruise day, so you literally, no matter how far you look in any direction, it's just water. Yep. And you just think to yourself, like, I'm kind of weird. I'm like, what if I literally tripped and fell over my balcony, which would be a hell of a fall. I mean, how do you trip over a balcony on a cruise ship? But then you go down there and then you're just like, and then you do that same thought experiment at night. And one of the
we call those Kyle thoughts.
Oh yeah. So I
was like, hey babe, I had a Kyle thought.
It's
She's
bad.
like, what?
No.
I was like, what if I tripped?
I've been guilty of
yeah.
thinking
Okay.
the same
So
thought.
all right. So Donnie has these thoughts as well. But there was this movie back in the day. It came out like when I was in high school. It was called Open Water. It was this husband and wife.
Shark.
Yeah. So it's like their
sharks.
honeymoon, and they go out with this snorkeling group or scuba diving group or whatever. Well, the guy on the boat miscounts, and so they're down, exploring whatever, doing all that, and then whenever this husband and wife come up, the boat is gone. All the people are gone. They're there by themselves. And so this movie's like 20 years old, people. So like spoiler alert here, but the scariest scene of the whole movie. So the ending was what the ending was. So maybe I'll leave a little bit on the bone for you guys. I want to go watch it. But the scariest moment was it's pitch black. And so this is a part of the movie where you can't really see anything because there's no moon, there's no stars, but there's a thunderstorm. And so this entire scene is just audio until there's lightning that strikes. And then they're out there literally just treading water, floating, like trying to figure out what exactly are we going to do. Lightning strikes and you see a shark fin. And it's just like, what? Like of all the things, it's like we're on land. We don't have to deal with that because people are like, well, you're scared of sharks. I was like, I'm not scared of sharks. I'm scared of getting eaten by a shark. And that can't happen when I'm sitting in my bedroom in Oklahoma. But it's one of those things like when you're staring into the abyss of darkness, like, and you don't know exactly what's out there, and then something brushes up against your foot, which also happened in that scene. Yeah, exactly. Both of y'all cringed because we all get that same thing. But I think we've all gotten to that point to where we think we're powerful. We think we have control because we have a weather app on our phone, and we think, we might know that the storm's coming, but we can't do a damn thing to stop it. And that's the rough part.
And I think that says a lot about how tough it was to just be calm in this situation. I mean, a lot of our deals were still can go home, and man, that had to feel, especially and notice these seasoned fishermen or these seasoned sailors. I mean, the guys on this boat had lived there. I mean, these weren't newcomers. So it says a lot about Paul.
For sure. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up, Donnie. Let's go ahead and hit 34. Wait, you just read, didn't you?
No, he read, but he read for me because I couldn't read good. So
Ryan, this is your time to redeem yourself so you can read good out loud.
I believe
All right,
in you,
so
Ryan.
here we go. 39 through 44, don't mess up.
Now I'm going to mess up.
Yeah, I know.
Now, when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach, on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes that tied the rudders. Then hoisting the foresails to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow struck and remained unmovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered that those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for land, and the rest on the planks, and the rest on the planks or on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. I almost had it.
That was pretty
Almost
good.
had it.
Like, dude, that's like an A effort. AA minus. That's good.
Yeah, A minus.
Acceptable. Okay, we'll take A minus. He's shipwrecked. Right, this guy has experienced so many things. Like, obviously, he took bread. It is kind of a little funny where it's like, hey guys, pause. Let's just give thanks here. Very next paragraph. And they shipwrecked. And so it's like, but again, like, you got to think, like, if you're going to shipwreck, you'd rather shipwreck in the very beginning of the storm, I guess, and not like go through a couple of weeks of this, because one of the reasons why we see that they haven't eaten food, either they were so busy trying to keep everything keep the ship from going down that they didn't eat, or they were so seasick that they couldn't possibly stomach any food. I saw that it could have been both here. And so they go through all that and they still end up shipwrecked. And it actually gets worse at the beginning of Acts 28. You'll have to come back next week for that, but let's talk about that right here.
I think a good thing to look at is that at least if I'm going to shipwreck, at least I can see a beach and sand.
Yeah.
And if you can swim, you're probably going to make it, rather than being like that one couple out in the middle of the ocean, where there's nothing around. So like, there's hope, there's hope when you can see a beach.
I took out of this more than anything is that God honored his promise.
Yeah.
And sometimes when God honors his promise, that doesn't mean it's the way we want it. Like, hey, you all survived, but you're shipwrecked and you're at an island and you're wet and you're hungry. But by the way, I honored my promise. And so sometimes that doesn't look the way we want it to, but God did honor his promise. He took care of everybody, all set, 276 were saved.
He honored his promise, and that's one of the things for us that if we feel like God has given us a promise, like to us specifically, right? Not necessarily one that's here in Scripture, because if it's here in Scripture, like, you can take the bank, but a lot of these promises were made to a particular person or to a particular group at a particular time. So it's for us to learn from, but it's not for us in terms of our promise. But then there is always the promise of the gospel, and that the fact that Jesus was sent here to provide payment for our sin debt so that we could be in the presence of a holy and just Father someday. All we have to do is accept that. And we don't know exactly how that works with free will and sovereignty and all that. We can debate it all day long. We're not going to, and we're not going to now, but it's just one of those things that it is what it is. And so if you do receive salvation, that is a tremendous thing. But guys, we are wrapped up with Acts 27. And if you want to come back here next week, guess what, guys? We're going to wrap up the entire book of Acts with Acts 28. So make sure you're read up through all the way through the book of Acts. And we will be announcing the next book of the Bible that we're going into, which I am personally very, very excited about. But we're going to leave it there for now. Come back here ready to talk about Acts 28 next week. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. Just a reminder, we are affiliated with Crossway, a great publisher. They've got a forging table starter set. It is 5 incredible books that if you get all 5, you get them at a 50% discount. That is half off, guys. You can check that out in the show notes. You can go in there and get all the instructions there. Where is it, Ryan?
Show notes.
Show notes. It's in the show notes. And then also the Logos Bible software, the most powerful of all Bible softwares on the planet Earth, guys. I used it for the entire way for my study for the book of Acts. It's been a tremendous asset to me personally, but you guys should use the Logos Bible software, but don't use it at full price. Use it as a discount. There is a discount code that is where, Ryan?
In the show notes?
In the show notes, guys. Man, after last week, you kind of struggled there at the end with wondering where all the notes were after all these years, but you're back on.
I thought on Crossway you had to put in your code name, but no, it's in the show notes.
Your code name?
Your code,
what's my code name? I'm Red Dragon. All right, here we go.
I don't know about Red Dragon.
No. It is what it is. But here we go, guys.
Buzzkill.
Also, what do we got here? Oh,
in the show notes.
In the show notes. We got signs and everything.
In the show notes, we're going to have Donnie's books in there too. So if you're...
Yeah, so when Donnie gives you that list of books, it'll be in the show notes. It'll be on social media. Also, before we let you go, we are a donation-based ministry, guys. If you want to see more content like this, getting out to more guys around the globe that want to be able to be equipped to be able to push back darkness, you guys have got to hop on board, become a monthly donor. We would appreciate you considering it. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.